This is Whiskey Romeo Kilo Lima 889. Are you at the rendezvous?
Roger that.
Copy. I'm en route. ETA 20 minutes. On today's episode of Survival Dispatch Academy, we're looking at GMRS handheld radios for the average person. They perform at a decent level without the hurdles of becoming a licensed ham radio operator or having to learn how to finesse CSV files to program radios. I want to be clear right off the bat, this is not an instructional how-to video. The purpose of this video is to give a high-level overview of GMRS and explain why it's one of the best choices for the average person without a steep learning curve when it comes to emergency comms. We chose two GMRS handheld radios to give you an idea of what you can get for $175 to $275 for a high-quality radio, tax, shipping, as well as a GMRS tuned antenna. The radios that we chose for this video are an order of magnitude better than cheap Baofeng radios. I've seen UV5Rs for as little as $20 to $30 on some websites, and I've never understood how people can justify spending thousands of dollars on their guns, their ammunition, force multipliers like night vision and body armor, and then they put a $20, $30 cheapo radio in their go bag. Doesn't make sense. The four most common types of handheld radios would be CB radios, FRS radios, GMRS radios, and ham radios. And I'll quickly go through them before we get into the meat of this video. This is a CB radio. The CB stands for Citizens Band. This technology was released by our military in 1945. CB radios have 40 channels in the AM band, a maximum of 4 watts of power, and are intended for short-range communications. The next type of radio that's fairly common is FRS, Family Radio Service. I don't have any on hand to show you. We were recently sent some from a company called Milo. We passed them on to Mike Sterling, and he's going to be doing a review on those in the near future. The deal with FRS is they use FM bands, no license required, 22 channels, super low wattage. They can have a max of 2 watts, but many of the times it's like half a watt. They have fixed antennas, so you can't put a better antenna on them. So these are very short range communications, kind of like kids radios that you would see. So 100 yards, yeah, I mean, that's average. You might get 200 yards if you have a clear line of sight, but they're really not a radio that's intended for emergency communication purposes. Most people have heard of ham radios. This is a Baofeng F8 HP. They're around $60. They don't come with this Nagoya antenna, by the way. So if you were going to buy something like this, you'd budget maybe around $75 with tax and shipping. They work on 29 different bands. The other two radios I've already covered, and when I get into GMRS, don't operate in multiple bands like a ham radio does, which means that they have a much broader range that you can communicate with people. However, the learning curve for many people is fairly steep. So to bare minimum, you need a technician's license, which you have to study for. So $35 to take the exam, but a lot of people don't pass it. A lot of people don't have the time to invest to learn all the technical jargon and rules and regulations that go with it. Now, these handheld units, 5-6 watts, it's kind of average, but base stations can have up to 1,500 watts. So these are the type of radios where if you learn the system and you learn how to use repeaters, you can conceivably communicate with people across the country and around the entire globe. So these are probably like the category that has the most potential, but it's also the category with the steepest learning curve and additional requirements. Like I said, studying for an exam, taking an exam, paying for the training, paying for the exam, etc., etc., etc. It's a little bit heavier of a lift than many people want to do, which is why we're going to talk GMRS next. Let's talk General Mobile Radio Service, aka GMRS. These radios use the same UHF FM band as FRS radios, but have way more power. So instead of half a watt of power in an HT, handy talkie, this guy here has 5.5 watts. And when you hook it up with a high quality antenna, this is an ABRI, the performance is really surprising. And I'm going to show you all some tests that my wife and I ran that were really surprising for this particular handset. Unlike ham radio though, you don't have to study for an exam, you don't have to pass an exam. You can pay $35, get a license that extends all the way out to your first cousins, and you're legal to use these kind of radios. You can get base stations, portable base stations, goes in your truck, goes in your house. When you pair it up with the right antenna, yeah, it's not 1500 watts like a ham radio, so you're not going to communicate around the world, but you can go a pretty good distance, especially if the antenna is at a high enough elevation that handsets that are trying to repeat or connect through it are unobstructed. California has a huge network of repeaters, and there's many people who are reporting 75 miles, let's say, north of a repeater, and another person 75 miles south of the repeater are able to communicate on these HTs. That's 150 miles, obviously, and that's awesome performance from something that's a really light lift. Go buy the radios, get your antennas, fill out the form. The form is probably actually the hardest thing of them all, trying to navigate a convoluted government website. But beyond that, it couldn't be easier. Let's get into specifics next. This is the Ocean KG Q10G HT Handy Talkie that I've already shown you a couple times. This is the best GMRS handheld unit that we've tested. And I just went through my notes and I accidentally previously mentioned 5.5 watts. This is actually 6 watts, which is pretty awesome from a handheld unit. As you can see on the screen, you can monitor 2 channels at a time. So I've got CB17 and GMRS 17 on here, and you can flip back and forth between the 2 of them. There's a 3000 milliamp hour lithium ion battery pack that seems to run forever in our tests. These guys come pre-programmed. Technically you don't have to do anything with them from a programming perspective. So you don't need to learn how to craft CSV files in Microsoft Excel and worry that there's hidden return characters. So when you try to push your programming up to the radio with software like Chirp, like you do with most ham radios, you don't have to do any of that. That's another thing that makes the lift a little bit lighter, not quite as heavy. There is a channel wizard, so you can add or change channel parameters directly from the keypad. I've found that this HT has got super clear audio, and it's a really, really loud speaker. So when I was riding my e-bike and I had this clipped to the front of my jean jacket, my wife was communicating with me. Even with all the surrounding noise, I had no problems hearing everything that she was saying. There's some other cool features on this. You can adjust the backlighting if you want to save battery power. Unlike some of the more economical handsets, it's IP67 water resistant, which most of the other ones are like IP66. You can get weather alerts on this. There's 14 different themes, 4 of which you can customize yourself. This has a super heterodyne receiver. Long word, big word. Not the cheaper ones that are used by many other radio manufacturers. It's got GPS features, so you can send somebody your location. So if you get separated, you can find each other. This guy, without getting too technical on the receiver, it's got a much broader range that it's capable of listening in on and relaying to you. So this guy here is $219.99. Our favorite place to get this stuff, by the way, is buy2wayradios.com. Not Amazon, nobody else. And the reason I say that is not only are their prices like really competitive, when we've had technical questions, they answer the phone and they have staff, and it's North Carolina or South Carolina. It's not too far from us here in Florida. Same time zone as us. Anytime I've ever needed guidance, not just with this radio, but with other products, I call them. They're super, super helpful. So I would just give them a shameless plug as far as that's concerned. Now we have another Ocean handset for GMRS that we'll cover next that's a little bit more economical, but we found the performance to be darn near as good as the green one. The next handset is also from Ocean, and is the KG935G Plus, not to be confused with the previous version, which doesn't have the plus on the end of the name. You can get these guys for $149, $309 for a 2-pack, which is what we got. This is one of the best GMRS HTs as well. It's not quite as expensive as the green one, and it doesn't have quite as much functionality, but for your average person who just wants to turn the device on, push a button, and talk, this one's probably easier for the average person. And it's 5.5 watts of power, so it's a half a watt less than the green one. You can monitor 2 channels at the same time, as you can see on the screen, just like the green one. A little bit smaller battery, 2600 milliamp hours, but it does have the channel wizard if you do want to, you know, change channels, meaning change the configuration of channels. This is super clear, got great audio, just like the green one. We put a different antenna on this. This is a Nagoya 771G, G for GMRS. I will mention that when you have a ham radio and you're across 29 different bands and you put an antenna on it, the antenna tries to be good at all 29 bands. When you narrow your focus down to just GMRS, you can actually put a tuned antenna on that makes a pretty healthy difference in the distance that you can communicate. And again, we're going to show you some footage of that here very shortly. Now, something that Ocean has done that I absolutely love is there's a USB-C charging port directly on the battery. This battery comes off, you get a spare battery. So you don't have to carry around a bulky charger, you know, like a base set to set it into. You don't have to have your radio plugged in. You can plug the battery directly into USB-C, put the spare battery on, good to go. That's a great feature. Every radio should have that feature. This guy has IP66 waterproofing, so not quite as robust as the green one, but again, it's a much more economical handset that still has great performance. 10 themes instead of 14 themes. And I mentioned how amazing the battery life was on the green one. This one actually lasts even longer. So it's less milliamp hours, but however they've got these things function internally as far as utilizing the power source, this guy is like bad to the bone on battery. I've had this guy turned on for upwards of 4 weeks at a time. A little bit of communication between my wife and I. It's easier than screaming at each other across the building here and pick one of these up, but can't say enough when it comes to just how good the battery life is with these guys. Just like the other one, the green one, this very specific model, I follow a guy in California who's big into radios, and he got 127 miles with connecting to a repeater in the middle that had a high elevation. We're going to bring in some base stations, some GMRS base stations soon with permanent antennas on our home, see if we can get it, you know, as high as possible. And then we're going to bring these guys back out again, this one plus the green one, and see just how far we can get in a densely populated area. We've got all kinds of valleys and hills, believe it or not, here in Central Florida at, you know, the subdivision we live in, with a lot of really big mature oaks. And any type of radio, whatever's in between you and the person you're trying to communicate with, will dramatically shrink what your range is. So stay tuned for that one. We'll probably do the Ocean, I think it's the 1000G that we've been looking at. It could be a Midland as well, but stay tuned for that. So let's talk a little bit more performance next.
WRKL 889, do you copy?
Roger that, 2.6 miles away. We live on the edge of town, a large, mature subdivision. We've got huge oak trees. We've got peaks and valleys. Yes, we have peaks and valleys here in Central Florida. If you look at the map that's up on the screen right now, the difference between Y peak and Y valley is approximately 50 feet in elevation. You can see a tributary just above the valley sign there, or valley word, I should say. And it's not uncommon during a hurricane for that entire stretch of road to be so far underwater that even lifted 4x4s cannot get through there. So all HTs, all radios, handy-talkies, and base stations for that matter, are greatly impacted by obstructions between one point and the other. So here's what's amazing about this test with these GMRS radios. X marks the spot, which is the furthest we've ever been able to get with a HT. And Z marks our new HT record. So as you probably heard me, you know, to go the way of the road, it's 2.6 miles to get back to where my wife was, 1.35 miles the way the bird flies, with a ton of obstructions between us. Just to the right of the Z, there's actually a valley there that probably drops 75 plus feet, and I'm on the far side of that valley, still way below the elevation from where my wife was. So as far as performance is concerned from these HTs, we're not talking huge distances here, whether it's the previous record or the new one, but it shows you how much the impact is from foliage, trees, buildings, peaks, and valleys. When you get into an open stretch, these handsets are capable of much greater distances. And like I mentioned before, we're going to be doing a test with a base station with a big tuned GMRS antenna on the roof of our home. And I'm really interested to see what we can then achieve in a suburban, densely populated suburban area with all the features that I've already mentioned. All right, let's wrap this up with some pros and cons and some other relevant information that we're going to put on screen. Might be here, might be there. We'll see you afterwards. Anyway, let's talk pros. So GMRS, no need to learn how to program using Chirp software or otherwise, and no need to create CSV files either. No ham radio technician's exam or operator's exam and license required. GMRS license, super easy to get. Again, the hardest part's filling out the dang form on the FCC's website because it's convoluted just like everything else from the government. But once that's done, 35 bucks, your license good for 10 years, extends again all the way out to your first cousins. High wattage, 5.5 to 6 watts from handsets, the new GMRS handsets. Amazing performance compared to GMRS specific radios just in the past few years. Super easy to use. They've got great performance, and we showed that to you already. Still to this day, we're really surprised at just how far we were able to get, again, in a neighborhood with lots of peaks and valleys, large oak trees, and big homes. And at the end of the day, you know, all those pros, if you're a more advanced user, you can still use the software for motion, you can still use Chirp, and you can still do all of the things that you like to do with your ham radios, albeit confined to the GMRS band. So let's talk cons. Number one, no frequency hopping. And you're not going to find frequency hopping on a lot of radios as it is, as well as the fact that you're limited. So military radios, which are not legal for civilians to own, can hop up to 100 channels per second. So like a Harris handheld radio, $18,000, $19,000, $20,000 handset. So we're not going to really complain too much about, you know, handsets that are, say, $175 to $275 not having that feature. No encryption. So technically, encryption's not legal on ham radios either, but there are multiple ham radios on the market that have encryption on them and people use them. You can also buy used radios from, you know, eBay that have been used by law enforcement that still have the encryption on them. I'm not counseling you to do that. I'm just telling you that some people do that. But at the end of the day, these types of radios are also subject to interference. In other words, it's an FCC requirement that these types of radios, if something else, more powerful radio comes along, or somebody else wants to use that channel, they can, and you might have to go to another channel. So speaking of which, Mike Sterling gave us a plan way back when on poor man's frequency hopping. So essentially at the top of each hour, you could define this SOP however you want, but you know, say take the time minus 3 hours and everybody puts their handset on that channel because you're not, you know, close to each other and you can't holler at each other, but you know as soon as the top of the hour comes, it's 3 p.m. Okay, well, we're going to take 3 off of 15. We're going to go to channel 12, for example, military time, by the way. And then every 15 minutes, go up a channel until you get to the top of the next hour. So now it's 1600, 4 p.m. minus 3. All right, so we're going to be on channel 13, and then again every 15 minutes we'll just go up a channel. So it's a poor man's frequency hopping. It doesn't give you, super robust privacy or security, but it's better than nothing. And, if you're in an area that's not densely populated, you're not going to find a whole lot of people listening in on you or have any interference. Generally speaking, you can hear this stuff. So, for example, this radio's turned on, this radio's turned on. They're both on channel 17. And you can probably just hear that click a little bit. You can actually see the light turn green when I do the PTT on this one. So if somebody's spying on you and they touch that PTT button, you're going to have an idea that there's somebody in the background. Anyway, we appreciate you following Survival Dispatch. Check out the links down below for the best deals on these GMRS handsets. And if you have questions, by all means, reach out to us. We'll do the best that we can to answer your questions.